What often surprises people is that reclaiming focus does not require dramatic changes at first. It begins with awareness. Once someone starts noticing how frequently attention is pulled away, distraction loses some of its power. Interruptions stop feeling invisible. Each impulse to switch tasks becomes a moment of choice instead of an automatic reaction. This awareness alone can be uncomfortable. It reveals how fragmented the day truly is. Minutes disappear into checking, scanning, and reacting. Hours pass without meaningful progress. But this discomfort is useful. It creates contrast. Without contrast, distraction feels normal. With contrast, depth becomes noticeable and desirable. As people experience even brief periods of uninterrupted focus, something changes. Work feels different. Time behaves differently. A single task absorbs the mind. Thinking becomes clearer. Ideas connect more naturally. These moments are often short at first, but they leave a strong impression. They show what is possible. This is important because motivation for depth rarely comes from theory. It comes from experience. Once the mind tastes full engagement, shallow work becomes less satisfying by comparison. At this stage, many people make a critical realization. Distraction is not relaxing, it is numbing. Scrolling, switching, and reacting do not restore energy. They delay fatigue while increasing mental clutter. True rest feels different. It feels quiet. It feels complete. Focused work followed by genuine rest creates a rhythm the brain recognizes as healthy. Fragmented work followed by fragmented rest does not. This is why many people feel exhausted even when they are not working particularly hard. Their attention never settles. Their mind is always partially engaged, even during supposed downtime. Depth restores boundaries. When work is focused, rest is real. When rest is real, focus becomes sustainable. Another subtle shift happens as attention strengthens, priorities sharpen. When distractions fade, the noise around goals fades as well. People begin to see which efforts actually matter. They notice how little of their time drives most of their results. This clarity is uncomfortable at first. It exposes wasted effort, it challenges habits, it forces decisions. But it also simplifies life. Instead of chasing many small tasks, focused individuals commit to fewer, more meaningful ones. They stop trying to keep up with everything and start building something specific. This shift reduces anxiety. Much of modern stress comes from vague pressure, too many inputs, unclear expectations, endless obligations. Depth replaces vagueness with direction. It becomes easier to say no because yes has meaning. It becomes easier to delay responses because progress is visible. It becomes easier to tolerate silence because work is moving forward. Importantly, this does not make people less effective collaborators, it makes them better ones. When someone thinks deeply before speaking, conversations improve, meetings become more efficient, feedback becomes more precise, contributions become more valuable. Depth improves communication by improving thinking. This contradicts the assumption that constant interaction creates better outcomes. In reality, quality interaction depends on quality thought. Without time to think, communication becomes noise. This is why many of the most impactful contributions come from people who speak less but think more. As depth increases, confidence grows quietly. Not the loud confidence of constant presence, but the steady confidence of capability. This confidence does not require comparison. It comes from progress, from knowing that time is being invested, not spent. Eventually, the question shifts again. It moves from "how do I focus" to "what deserves my focus?" This is a more difficult question, and a more important one. Because focus is powerful. Applied carelessly, it can still lead to wasted effort. Applied intentionally, it shapes careers, skills, and lives. The ability to choose what to ignore becomes as important as the ability to concentrate. This is the deeper implication of depth. It forces intentional living. It reveals that attention is not just a resource for work, but a foundation for identity. What someone focuses on consistently is what they become good at. What they become good at shapes how they contribute. How they contribute shapes how they are valued. This chain is invisible in the short term, but decisive in the long term. And this is why reclaiming focus is not about productivity tricks. It is about alignment between effort and outcome, between time and values. From here, the conversation naturally turns toward structure. Not rigid rules, but supportive systems. Not extreme isolation, but deliberate design. That is where focus stops being fragile and becomes reliable. And that is where depth stops being an occasional state and becomes a way of operating.
As attention becomes more deliberate, another pattern starts to emerge. People begin to notice how often they confuse urgency with importance. Many tasks arrive with pressure attached. They feel immediate, they demand response. But when examined closely, they rarely contribute to long-term progress. They maintain systems, not outcomes. Deep focus exposes this illusion. When someone regularly steps back to think deeply, it becomes obvious which efforts actually move the needle. Most do not. A small fraction of work produces most of the value. The rest creates the feeling of productivity without its substance. This realization can be unsettling. It forces reevaluation. It challenges routines that once felt necessary. It raises uncomfortable questions about how time has been used. But it also creates freedom. Once priorities are clear, effort becomes lighter, not because work disappears, but because it is better aligned. Energy flows toward what matters instead of being scattered across everything that asks for attention. At this stage, people often notice resistance from their environment. Systems built around constant availability do not adapt easily to depth. Expectations push back. Habits try to reassert themselves. This is where commitment matters. Depth is not maintained by enthusiasm alone. It is maintained by identity. When someone begins to see themselves as a person who protects focus, decisions become easier, boundaries feel justified, trade-offs feel intentional. This identity shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking, "Can I afford to focus?" the question becomes, "Can I afford not to?" Because once depth starts producing results, distraction becomes expensive. It delays progress, it weakens thinking, it erodes momentum. People who reach this point stop romanticizing busyness. They stop mistaking motion for meaning. They stop filling every gap with stimulation. They learn to tolerate silence. Silence is not empty. It is where ideas organize themselves. It is where understanding deepens. It is where insight forms before it is expressed. This is why many breakthroughs happen away from screens, away from noise, away from constant input. The mind needs space to connect what it already knows. Depth creates that space. Another consequence of sustained focus is patience. When attention is no longer constantly fragmented, time horizons expand. People become willing to invest effort without immediate reward. They understand that mastery unfolds gradually. This patience is rare and valuable. It allows people to pursue difficult goals others abandon. It allows them to stay with problems long enough to truly understand them. It allows them to build things that cannot be rushed. In a culture obsessed with speed, patience becomes a competitive advantage.
At this point, deep focus stops feeling like a tactic and starts feeling like a philosophy. It influences how work is approached, how days are structured, how decisions are made. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional. And something unexpected happens. Anxiety decreases. Much anxiety comes from unfinished thinking, from tasks half-started, from goals vaguely defined, from attention pulled in too many directions. Depth resolves this by forcing clarity. It demands definition. It encourages completion. When the mind knows what it is doing and why, tension eases. This does not mean work becomes easy. It means effort becomes coherent. Coherent effort is sustainable. Fragmented effort is not. This is why people who embrace depth often report feeling calmer even while taking on harder challenges. Their energy is no longer leaking in every direction. They are not doing less. They are doing fewer things better. And now the foundation is nearly complete. From here, the discussion naturally shifts away from philosophy and toward design, how to structure days, environments, and commitments so that depth is not constantly under threat. This is where intention becomes system, and that transition marks the end of the conceptual groundwork.